Thank you so much for inviting me, and to be with such esteemed people around me. It's an absolute privilege. This is, of course, an area close to all our hearts and very close to mine for a variety of reasons. I guess I first got into it because there were people who were disclosing to me, and I realized I was not equipped to support. And so I retrained in this area with a master's degree, and then I worked closely on a PhD project called Breaking the Silence. Are you happy for me to share a video, a PowerPoint? Yeah, if I may do that.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Can you see that? Are you okay?
Yes, we can see.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so I'm just looking at the fight against child abuse and looking at the areas that people do look at. We know what the areas of child abuse are: the physical, the sexual, the emotional, and neglect. I don't think I have to go through that, because I think this is an aspect that we're all very aware of, and the different problems that each can bring, as well as the overlap for those. I asked the question, why should we care? And I guess the answers are going to be because it's prevalent across the world. This crosses all barriers, whether you might be wealthy or poor, whatever your religion, whatever your beliefs, whatever your culture, wherever you are born, this is prevalent across the world. And it's hurting children, and our children can't speak out or protect themselves. And thus it causes long-term damage. And for me, the bottom line is very simplistic, because it's wrong. Is there anything that we can do? And this is, I suppose, where my starting point is, because the best possible scenario has got to be to eliminate the problem at its root cause, i.e., looking at what is happening with the perpetrators themselves. The biggest issue here is that, do we create an environment that is conducive to perpetrators disclosing what their tendencies might be? And no, we don't. Because who can a perpetrator turn to? They're vilified. And I'm not saying that's wrong that they are, but they are. They're isolated, they're condemned, they are abhorred. Who on earth would want to share such a secret? Who would dare to disclose such a problem? Who would ever trust another person to share their desires, knowing that much of society is horrified by what they might be doing or thinking? So society makes it impossible. So that leads us on to thinking, well, okay, so what do we do? What do we have to do first? Well, we need to create a safe opportunity for the perpetrators to be able to reveal their thoughts and possibly their actions. And then we must find appropriate treatment, counselling, support systems, anything that will diminish their desires and reduce that danger to children. That sounds like we're already close to a solution, but you and I, and many of us all know this is not the case. And in fact, child abuse is on the increase. So why isn't it that simple? There are many reasons for this, but the key ones are the fact that we're not in a position to be able to assist all the perpetrators, even if they are willing to disclose. We don't have a magic cure, and not all perpetrators would want to be helped anyway. And that's the essence of the problem, because if we could support and heal, for want of a better word, or change the inclinations of our perpetrator, we would not need programs from the NSPCC. We would not need Chrissy Sykes' My Body is My Body program based on music. Our children would be safe. We're not in that position. And I can't see a close time when we will be. So therefore, the next question is going to be, okay, what do we do? And it's got to be then helping the children themselves to be able to look after themselves and save themselves, helping the parents, the adults who are working there to recognize some of the instances that might arise and some of the signs. So we're looking at training programs, and there are many around: child protection, safeguarding, UNICEF, lots and lots that we all know about, the NSPCC. And as I said, Chris's My Body is My Body program, which is a musical program, and I'm the UK ambassador for that over here. We also need to support those who have been affected already, the children, their families, and also not forgetting those to whom they have disclosed, because that can be very frightening too. So I move on to my key area, and I mentioned this before, the plans that I had for the PhD on breaking the silence. And the reason for this was because whilst I was working in schools many years ago when I was young, I was working in the art field, and it lent for opportunities for children to disclose. And I started thinking, well, why aren't we using our schools to actually make this more accessible? Schools are in a prime position to be able to support, to prepare and protect our children through the training and the talking. They're also in a really good position to find a safe haven for young people to go to feel that they will be believed, that they will be able to talk. We could be creating even better opportunities within different environments where our children go. It could be schools, youth clubs, whatever. What we do know is that we need to break the taboo, we need to encourage disclosure, and we need to stamp out secrets. Our children and our young people will only talk when they feel safe. Actually, that's the same for the perpetrator. They need to be believed, and they need not to be afraid of repercussions. But we've got to be very careful here, and we know this, that if somebody is disclosing to us, we're not going to turn around and say, that's fine, it's okay, I'm not going to tell anybody. We've actually got to say to them, I can't promise that this is going to be kept between you and me at all, but whatever happens is going to be better than what's happening to you at the moment. And that's a key area. So I looked at different lessons that lent themselves to actually young people being able to disclose and to qualified, and I emphasize qualified because not all teachers are qualified in child protection, but looking at what they could do within their own subject areas. Art is an obvious one with the paintings and the drawings, English, with poetry, with drama, because I'm talking about not just having a tiny little group of people and not just trying to reach those who are abused, but trying to educate those who can't even imagine what abuse might be like, and looking at those who might actually become perpetrators. So I'm looking at the whole group of people. PSHE is an obvious one where you can talk about self-esteem and secrets, and humanities looking at the geographical and the historical implications. Form time, where you can offer informal discussions and chats, and RE, which breaks across the cultures, the traditions, the rights and the beliefs. There are so many different areas that we could support. I would say that the key area, though, is to always create those windows of opportunity, but keep it simple, keep it accessible, make it real, and maybe make it hard-hitting. Demonstrate that it's not unique, also demonstrating that it is not the norm. And looking at the sharing that pain of secrecy and concentrating on this unfounded shame that lives with people for the rest of their life often. Providing that safe environment, don't push people too much, allow for those long silences if they're necessary, be prepared to respond appropriately, and the important thing is making sure that you seek expert help and support. And these are just a few of my own examples that I have used over years, drawings I've done, just to create opportunities for people to look and say, hey, what's that about? What do you think that means? opportunities for discussion, also opportunities for them to perhaps go away and share their emotions through the art form. So there are a variety of starting points. I won't dwell on them, but you get the idea. And they're just my little doodles, pen and inks. But they're good starting points. Same with the poetry. At the moment, every month, Chris's My Body is My Body program is focusing on different aspects of child abuse. And what I've been trying to do, because it's often very difficult to penetrate. I know we were talking earlier about the UK, but it's not always easy to penetrate into our schools either. There's set conditions, etc. So I've been writing these poems. I'll just show you this first one to give you an idea. I've kept it incredibly simple. Did you hear the bangs and bumps last night and the muffled, whimpering cries? Did you see him quietly leave my room and spread those hateful lies? Did you wonder why I often stayed as long as I could at school, hoping you might one day see beyond this classroom fool? I know I'm not the cleverest and I don't have many a friend, but I so need you to notice and make my sadness end. I'm just a little child, you know, but I've grown up awfully quick. I bleed and bruise and wet myself, and I'm often terribly sick. I just need someone I can trust to believe and take my side, to notice my behavior and to know why I have lied. I cannot do this for myself, yet how will I break free? Will you stand up against my suffering? Are you standing up for me? And each month I've been doing these poems. The next one is on, I won't read them all out, is Standing Up Against Bullying, which is the story of a young lad who took his life. The next one is Standing Up Against Cyberbullying, which is the story of a young girl who was groomed online with photographs, etc. The next is a story of forced marriage and a young girl meeting a very elderly man and being left there. And the final one that I've just done is Standing Up Against Child Labour, and the story of a young girl and her brother and what happened to them. They had dreams and etc. Again, poetry lends itself. It's a starting point. And I must emphasize, it's not just for victims. This is also for potential perpetrators. So finally, I'm looking at the summary would be provide the opportunities for perpetrators to seek help, educate and prepare parents, guardians to warn and empower their children, train up the teaching staff and anybody who happens to be working with children, making sure that we also equip our children with appropriate awareness and training the children to defend their own rights and their bodies, and making sure that the concept of secrets is explored and telling someone is really not just important, but imperative, and not forgetting to support those who have suffered abuse. My final message to everybody would be, let's work together. Let's share ideas like we're doing today. It's such a privilege to be able to do this. Let's listen, let's believe, let's support. And I think it's really important not to forget to look after ourselves and to remember that the world is full of good people too, and that much happiness is there to be enjoyed. Because this area can engulf, I know that, it can engulf you to the point of despair. And if you get to that stage, you're not any good to anybody. You're no good to yourself, you're no good to the children, you're no good to the perpetrators. So keep safe, keep perspective on this, and take care of yourselves. And massive thank you for allowing me to talk.
It's really great hearing you share so deeply and comprehensively, Dia. Like so many aspects that I think I'll touch on myself and add my points to. And really, for me, this has been a very important topic. All my life, I watched a very patriarchal system out in the world operate in a traditional Greek culture. And so I became very aware of gender and of gender dynamics and power and how it plays out between men and women, and of course power in general. So as a clinical psychologist, it was very common then that I would spend in my 23 years working a lot of time with women specifically that have had sexual abuse trauma from often someone they know or someone even in their family, and often enough their fathers. And on, I would say, more rare occasions, although the statistics show it's very much increasing and almost equaling at times to gender-based violence against women, I would also meet many men in session that have been actually dominated or sodomized by a male figure in their family. Very rarely would I hear of gender-based violence from women to men, but of course we know, of course, that this is occurring. So I mention this because I wanted to start off saying that for me there's a very strong awareness we have to have about the system that we've built in society that does create a kind of normalcy or normalization of power and aggression and ways of dealing with emotions and insecurities and shame and all kinds of things I want to get into more deeply in a moment, in very specific ways. And we have to recognize that right now we live in a system that is perpetuating that. There are some very powerful theories that refer to this on a neurological level. But before I get there, let me say for me, the turning point was before studying, I actually decided to work as a volunteer in a center called Rape Crisis Center in South Africa. I know Chrissy Sykes too. I'm working with her project Ambassador for Cyprus and leveraging it into a more interactive process with children where they learn to play drumming, and the instrument of the drum will be added to the songs because I really think it's important to have a more tactile programming that happens. And we're collaborating to do that. But before all those things happened in my career, I was really volunteering for the Rape Crisis Center. And I mention that because South Africa was almost the rape capital of the world at the time. So rape every 4 seconds. And there were very many occurrences of gang rape as well. And what's interesting about that is that most women who are raped often have a sexual abuse history in childhood as well, which lends itself to lots of debates and controversy. And it becomes a very complicated conversation then because we need to look at what does that mean. I don't know that we'll have time for all of it today, but I mention it because in that center, it was very clear for me after 3 years of doing this work that I was going to dedicate my career in some way to doing something about this or having a deeper conversation about it. And I want to say that for me, the summary then of it after 23 years of working with different people and looking at a lot of the research and watching also all kinds of abuse that happens sexually, physically, and through forms of aggression and power. And I would like to add to that, we have lots of racial abuse that happens to children. We have lots of gender-based abuse. We also have kind of social economic status type abuse. So people that have power in some way can abuse anybody that they consider inferior or of lesser power to them. So the conversation becomes a lot about power. Who holds the power and why? And how does it get to leak out onto victims? And if we really consider it truthfully, every victim is a potential perpetrator in the future, because we know that many perpetrators have themselves a child abuse history. So that makes the conversation so much more important and so much more relevant to each and every human being, because then we all have to take responsibility for the fact that we live and operate in a society where we might be misusing our power in some way. And this comes to light often when one works deeply with people and we look at our own lives. We might not think that we are perpetrators of some form of power or status or violence against another person who is less powerful than us. But we've seen over and over again in the world, we have many, many ways of awareness trying to develop amongst our species of this very fact, that we are accountable, we do make mistakes, we judge people, we inflict all kinds of personal baggage onto other people in many different ways. So for me, the result of all of that, what I've said so far, is that it's come down to really wanting to understand what are the core issues that we haven't managed to resolve as a species in order to have this phenomenon. What is causing this phenomenon of, let's say, inappropriate or maladaptive, we say in psychology terms, or pathological, even disease-based or disease-causing, or abnormality of the psychology of a person's behavioral process? What is causing it? And why is it so difficult for us to resolve it? So I've spent my career really trying to answer that question. And I've come down to what I think are two key points, but there's a third and a fourth that get added as extras. And the first one is that generally, I think what we have to start to look at in terms of solving, because I think Dee expressed so many valuable points already about the very specific steps that need to be taken. So I want to add to this on a core level. It's the way that we also deal with emotions. As a society, as a species, we haven't evolved our emotional intelligence to the level where we absolutely understand, many of us, all of us. And it's a very difficult job to do. What are the limits for the way that I express my emotion, my frustration, my anger, my power, my status? What are the limits? And this is something that we can see in many perpetrators. The urge is so strong. And it's often there because there's been some distortion of power from a parental figure or an elder adult in childhood again. And the abuse has occurred in their childhood. And so they have received a kind of experience and a message that there are certain things that you do in order to relieve certain emotions. And this is then modeled behavior. And then, of course, there's trauma added to that. And so one way to heal and relieve is to reenact that trauma. And there's many reasons why the neurological system, the brain, body, mind system reenacts trauma and reinflicts abuse. In fact, Freud, one of the fathers of psychology, even though he's very old school and outdated now, but he added something very powerful at the very beginning. He said, we have the compulsion to repeat. This is a phenomenon, a psychological phenomenon. There's no one that can avoid it. One has to do lots of what is now called neuroplasticity training or neurogenesis training. You have to rewire the brain to stop the compulsion. So once we know that, we have to really recognize that there's something going wrong in the way we educate, the way we understand, and the way we organize the emotional system and the sexual energy in our society. And there are some really great theorists like Dr. Claudia Naranjo, who speaks a lot about the three aspects of the brain. Talks about the right side, the left, and the back brain. Also talking about it, he refers to the mother brain, or the feminine part of the brain, creative, intuitive, expressive, the logical, rational on the left, which he calls the father brain. Very interesting dynamics happen then between mother and father brain. And then the child part of the brain, or the instinct, reptilian brain, as a lot of people talk about it. Why is this relevant? Because he's saying that because we haven't developed enough of this emotional intelligence in us, we don't have enough maturity in our limbic systems as a species. We kind of have repressed a lot of emotion for so long. And we see this is very common in pedophiliac behavior, in violent, aggressive temper type personalities. Is a very strong difficulty in containing aggression, containing the emotion. So we haven't been able to mature this emotional intelligence enough. So we just keep having a lot of what we call left brain dominance. And this is also something that became very strong in my career to try to understand. Through drumming and through music interventions using different styles of work, one can actually look at why these imbalances affect the brain and start to restore some of this, what we call hemispheric synchrony. The problem with this, though, is that in so doing, in building a society where we prefer logic and rationality and scientific thinking, not like in India where you have a lot more respect for the wisdom and the spiritual truth, which is all inclusive. It's not just about progress and logic and rationality. Because of this, we've repressed so much the reptilian brain, and the imbalance in the hemispheres has caused a lot of the sexual energy to be very suppressed. And so it leaks out in all kinds of criminal behavior, all kinds of pathological behavior. And really, you can see then that we haven't managed to educate people about what sexual energy really is. how to contain it, how to work with it, and how to work with these emotions that get tied up with sexual energy and or feel like they can be released through sexual energy or sexual expression. And this sense of being forbidden, this sense of secrecy that we see then as part of the abuse cycle is very important. It plays a very important role in trying to contain what is seemingly uncontainable, and then also unleash this kind of forbidden energy in some way where people can, the perpetrators are then able to kind of feel some relief, right? And this is all because we don't yet know how to teach this and how to really, we're trying, but I'm talking more about the paradigm shift of the whole of the human psyche. And this means we have to look at schools. We have to look at the way we teach children, not just about body safety and about their bodies, but the whole educational process, because every human being can become very wise and can mature this instinct from the reptilian brain. But because they haven't had the parenting, the modeling from the parenting, they've had abuse modeling, it's very difficult to do that. And the psychotherapeutic process to do that is very difficult, but can be done. Perpetrators can go through spaces of being unconditionally heard, loved, and respected for whatever urges they feel and learn how not to act on them. But we don't have societies, so beautifully said by Dee as well, that are so allowing and forgiving and supportive of the perpetrator, because we keep projecting it out and saying, well, it's not me, it's him, he's the bad guy. But if every person that's abused becomes the bad guy, we have to change the way we deal with that. So I love New Zealand as an example. They talk about correctional services as opposed to prison, and they work on a rehabilitation system when it comes to criminal activity. And this is, I think, the way that we have to begin to think of things. We have to rework shame. Shame is the really, really big emotion that human beings are not able to work well with at all. It causes a lot of darkness. It steals the light. And victims go almost 40 years. I've just finished working with someone who's almost 50, who is my example of the kind of solutions I found for this. Please give me a time check if I'm running over. And what I found really is important is to start having, like Trixie Sykes, like many others, people that begin to speak out against and for this rehabilitation, this kind of restorative justice process in society without being the ones who vilify the perpetrators, to have the nurturing and compassion that's needed to be able to understand that all abusers have severe trauma and that it is a disease of the sexual energy, the emotional energy, the mind, the body-mind system, and that it needs to be treated as such. And it needs very strong boundaries, but it also needs a whole behavioral modification process. So these kind of spokespeople are the women that I elevate specifically now as women. There are many men who are also speaking out against all kinds of abuse as well, and for the compassionate restorative justice about understanding what we really need to rectify in the world. So for me, the work is about being able to help everyone understand what is appropriate expression of emotion, what is not. Everyone to understand what is appropriate sexual activity and what is not, because it's quite astounding to see, even through the My Body project. I was amazed to learn and started to realize that a lot of adults don't realize that their abuse histories are causing so many more distorted ways of parenting their own children. And when we see how many parents possess children when they are the perpetrators and believe that they have the right to abuse that child, we can understand that again in the mind there is a very serious distortion around how to express one's own emotions and what's the limit, because I didn't get that limit when I was younger, so I'm a parent, so now I don't know where the line is, where the limit is. So this is why the re-education is so important. And of course I mentioned shame. I think by now there's almost 50% of children that are abused, if not more. Then maybe you can correct me on that. So we know we're dealing with half the world's population, if not more, at any given moment. So this is not just something we have to pay attention to. This is half of the world that is unable to function at its optimal state because the trauma that half of the world is carrying is obviously going to be re-inflicted somewhere. So this is a planetary issue. It's not just for the victims, it's not just for the perpetrators, it's for the entire evolution of our species. So the other point that we do a lot that I think has worked well is to not just have the spokespeople going out standing for the cause and really re-educating with awareness, with nurturing, with love, with compassion, with understanding, with forgiveness, but to also begin to make this point of how abuse affects the future generations, their ability to reshape the future, which is becoming such an important point right now, and the health of our planet in the future. Because if we have half our population abused and continuing to create these distortions that it's okay or that certain behaviors are all right, we will have a future generation, again, half of that generation really unhealthy and not very high functioning, because abuse and trauma actually steals high functioning as the opportunity that we all have in life is to learn, grow, and become wiser. But if you spend half your life just trying to solve the pain and suffering that you've had inflicted upon you, you are very compromised. Most women I see in adult life become overgivers. They become self-abandoning. And it takes them years to come out of this patterning again because of that link that I made at the beginning around patriarchy. So health is very important. It's interesting to know in the UN we have major health issues for women nowadays, and we know gender-based violence against women, specifically in young girls, is so serious that it's actually compromising women's health on 10 areas. So that's something I lobby for and work very deeply on. And I think making this point is profound, and people don't really see it yet, that a sexually abused girl child is a compromised mother of the future, compromised to the point even where she could be so psychologically damaged that she passes on a whole psychological trauma in the way she rears her child. So we keep having mothers, and this is a very interesting point. The mothers of the future, half of them are not going to be able to parent and mother comprehensively as mothers. They will be compromised. And the third point, which I think is quite obvious, is politics. There's so many people talking about this, but quite frankly, the legislation stays the same. The re-victimization of, I like to call them survivors, not victims, survivors in courts of law or justice type services are re-victimized. They are not necessarily taken seriously, and so we don't have a very successful judicial system on this topic, especially on rape. And it takes quite a lot. I mean, I remember the most radical case I saw was somebody in the media who had over 3,000 personalities. I think you might know this condition we call dissociative personality disorder, meaning that a sexually abused woman by her father in this case actually developed 3,000 different personalities to cope with her trauma. And she eventually studied psychology as an adult and took her father to court. And he was convicted. And it's the one case in millions that we look at as an example and say, wow, you know, this is what trauma can do, sexual trauma, and this is actually how we can see the result of somebody that is served by the justice system. But how many are not? So we have to look at that part. And I think to do it, we need to have more female voices in decision-making positions in judicial systems. The more women mothers that are there considering children in a different way to how sometimes men do in politics has been evidenced. There's lots of research for it. So we need to have more women in politics. We need to be supporting those women. And we need to be putting this on the agenda every step of the way. Again, with this very beautiful pathway of understanding forgiveness and firm boundaries around the fact that it's not appropriate behavior to cross these limits. But we have to understand that we live in a society where for some people that's really not clear. So the education part is so important. And then finally, I just want to accent what Dee said, is this point about potential perpetrators being able to have safe spaces. We do have to bring this in, and that's why I mentioned restorative justice thinking, because even criminal activity, even now, drug abuse has been confirmed to be because of violence or abuse in childhood. So we know that these are symptomatic of abuse. And so the self-care factor for all those who work on these topics needs to be up-leveled as well. And it's such a wonderful world to be living in right now, because there are amazing people rising, amazing people coming to the front and standing for the healing of our society. And I think we need to just be careful about how we support those people, and how we also get our own support when we are working in these topics, because they can be, as Dee and I'm sure all of you are saying often, even very, very challenging and very demanding on our own emotional resources. So we need to be very mindful of that. That's it from me.